Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of BookTrib Live, a Merrill Moss Media production. Today, we're thrilled to chat with Ken Murray, author of the new book, Eulogy. In addition to being an author, Ken also teaches creative writing at the University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. Ken has graciously agreed to give away a copy of Eulogy, so stop by BookTrib after the chat and comment on the live chat page to win. Thank you for joining us today, Ken. Before we start with our questions, can you bring us up to speed on Eulogy and the main thrust of the story?
Well, Eulogy, I guess you could say the story sort of hinges around this. What are the long-term effects when on a person if they try to fix their family with religion? In this book, William Oakes is a 30-year-old man who's looking back on his life or stuff that's happened in his life, and how, as a 10, 11-year-old kid, he saw how his parents' marriage was failing and his household was crumbling, and he became born again and then tried to fix his parents that way. And it didn't work out too well for him, but the religion seemed to work for them, but later on in life, it all kind of comes back to roost on him. And so that's kind of the starting point for the story, is, looking back and trying to make sense of the way you grow up, the religions you grow up with, and whether you accept them or reject them, and how life changes as you move on. So I think that's the starting point for thinking about how the story works.
Wow, that's really interesting. How and why did you first start working on this book? Like, what inspired you to want to tackle that kind of story?
It was less being inspired to tackle this story. There's more, I started writing a story, and that story didn't seem to be able to be contained in a few pages. It couldn't be contained in, multiple pages. It couldn't be contained in a few scenes. I had two different stories I was working on, and I didn't realize they were the same characters, and they came together. And really what I found about 10 years ago was I had this story of this boy who was very alone. He's about 11 years old, and things just needed to get better for him. And I didn't know who he was or what his situation was or who his parents were, so I wrote the story so I could understand them. And that may sound a little weird, but that's kind of the way, the imagination's funny that way. And so I spent a lot of time writing this story so I could know it, and then I spent a lot of time rewriting it so a reader could know it. And I think the thing that really drove me along was once I got to that moment where, this is a kid who tries to fix his house with religion. I found that made him really intriguing. A lot of people grow up in different religions. This is a kid who takes on a religion, and then what are the ramifications of that? So that's what really got me going.
Wow, that's really interesting. The idea of, so many kids try to fix their households with so many different things, but you don't often see a story with religion used as that sort of vehicle. So what was the writing process like for Eulogy? How did that happen? How did it work?
The process, at first, because, when I first started writing this, I was writing part-time. I had a full-time career, and I was writing nonfiction and essays in my spare time, and I just really wanted to be a fiction writer. I had these ideas I wanted to write, and so back then I was just squeezing in writing whenever I could, whenever I had the opportunity to find. If I could steal 15 minutes anywhere, I would take it. If I could steal an hour somewhere to write, I would. And I didn't really know what I was doing. And the one thing I didn't know then is every writer, when they're in the creative throes, really doesn't know what they're doing, except they have to keep going. And over that time, I started taking courses in creative writing, which at first I thought was completely bogus. Now I teach them. I was wrong. I was very wrong. They were. I found that taking courses. Creative writing courses sort of helped me have a structure. Knowing someone's going to be reading my work pushed me to do that much better work, and that was really helpful. So I really enjoyed that. Both here at U of T and then later when I was in graduate school at the New School in New York.
Cool. So have you been working on the two stories that seem to inspire Eulogy and come together to create this book? How long have you been? How many years have you been working on Eulogy?
I would say I was working on Eulogy from 2004, and then until about 2011. It was about 7 years. I finished it umpteen times and then threw it out several of those times till I finally got the version that you have now. And then I was reasonably pleased with what I had by then. And then it took several years to find the right publisher for it. So, it takes a while. When you're a first-time novelist, it just takes a lot of time. And, there's no point in rushing. The only rush I look at it for me is the rush to get to work each day. Get to work on the story and try and make it as good as you can, and then take it from there. And so, it was a lot of frustration. I always wanted to be the overnight success. So here I was just maybe a little bit delayed on that. So.
Well, hopefully soon you'll be living the dream. But that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, well.
No, it's okay. What were you about to say?
No, I was just really thinking about that idea that if I sometimes have students, who are really in a hurry, and I remember, having that urge to want to see my work in print, and then at the same time, I'll have students who say, like, and I remember myself saying this, or I'll hear myself saying sometimes, I'd give anything. This is the most important thing I want to do, is to write this story right in front of me right now. And then say, but I really should go shopping or something right now and get some groceries, or those kind of things. Like, we sort of under, I was supposed to go out with my friends tonight, go to the pub, so this is weird. We can always undermine the things we most want to do with the mundane things of day-to-day life. So I always think it's very important to put those things we most want to do, upright first every day.
That's really good advice. And speaking of that, one of the questions that I have here for you is, you're a creative writing teacher. So what is the biggest piece of advice that you give for aspiring writers? Is that patience that you've sort of exercised yourself? Is that one of the biggest pieces of advice, or is there anything else that you think an aspiring writer would like to know?
No, I think the most important thing is to write regularly. By regularly, I mean, like, the majority of the days of each week have to have concerted writing time, where you commit to the work, and that get started, keep working, and to not fear, to really just have no fear of what you might write. Sometimes I too often have students who come to me saying, well, I have this story I want to write, but I don't know if I should. And there's always some sort of, I don't know. It's often like these stories are touching on their own personal taboos or something like that. And my take is those are the stories we must write, because that's probably the material that has the most emotional resonance for the writer. And that'll translate into an experience for the reader as well. So I think the most important thing is to not only is to write, to not fear what you write, but also to even gravitate towards those things which make you a little nervous. I think those things really matter.
That's really well said, and I completely agree with you, even though I have no real experience being a famous author. However, kind of jumping off that point, Eulogy is a intensely personal novel for the main character, William Oakes, and I wanted to ask,
yes,
how biographical is this book? Is there anything that is inspired from real life, or anything you could share with our viewers in regards to that?
The events in this book are not autobiographical. I think it's important to state, thankfully, because this guy goes through a pretty tough situation.
You're putting it lightly.
That said, I should talk about, there are aspects, call it thematic things going on here, that are drawn from my life. I was, unlike William, I was raised in kind of, what we'd call a fundamentalist, type, religion. William's not raised in that. He finds it on his own. And so being someone who was raised in a religion that's very strict and narrow in its views, in my household, in our case, it was kind of a mix of televangelisms and some independent churches and the Pentecostal church as well. We had a whole mixed bag, often united by the theme of, the world is ending very soon. And so that's something I went through in life was, being raised in that and then finding my way out into the world, which of course is scary because you find out as soon as you venture out of a very strict way of thinking, you find out there are many ways of relating to the world. And of course, if your formative years are spent learning a very, very narrow way of looking at the world, it's tricky finding your own way. So thematically, in some ways, William Oakes goes through that idea of having to find his own way to relate to the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I did that too. But I did not go through the trauma that William goes through, and certainly not the emotional violence that his parents put each other through, and him by association.
Well, that's a good thing that you obviously didn't experience that, and I think that, oh yeah.
Yeah.
But William is a really dark character who has had so many things happen to him, and I wanted to ask about William's self-harming throughout the book. Do you think, what was the inspiration for that? What in his character made you think that, this is an avenue for him and going to be a big part of his character?
I got to thinking about him at one point, as I was writing, is what was his relationship with pain?
Mm-hmm.
It just seemed like a valid question. In terms of the way he's gone on in life, how would he's a guy who contains so much pain within him, and pain that I see rooted not so much in the religion, but in I call it the again, to use that term, the emotional violence of the house he grows up in, and the way it's almost like him harming himself is his taking control over the way his parents treated each other. And, being in charge of that. So, okay, he's now in charge of the pain. And so that's kind of the way I saw it. It's interesting, your question before we were talking about, my own,
Mm-hmm.
how do I relate to this? My relationship to pain is as an endurance athlete.
Wow.
Those are my sports, rowing, cross-country running, cross-country skiing, those kinds of things. I still do the Canadian ski marathon. We ski from Montreal to Ottawa over the course of 2 days.
Sounds painful.
You get to sleep outside. It's wonderful. Anyway, but, through these sports, I guess I was realizing I have that's my relationship to, to pain in a way. Like, most endurance athletes, we all have variations on this thing where, maybe a sport hurts for a little while and then you breeze through that and you go into this nice blissful state. And athletics definitely didn't fit William Oakes at all. It's just, he's not an athlete. He's not a guy out there doing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I started to think about, that idea of someone who would harm himself. That seemed to be a fit. And of course, it also plays on another one of my rules of storytelling. That is, if an element comes up in a story and it looks scary, you must pursue it. When that first popped up for him, I was like, wow, that's a little weird. That's a little dark. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go with this and see if it works. And in the end, I think it does work. I think it adds to the story. I think it reveals more of him. And I think the reader who commits to going with that will, experience some of his life, and I think the story grows by that element too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I completely agree as a reader of it. And also, that's an interesting point. I never drew the connection between endurance sports and pain, just because I'm not an endurance sports athlete. But yeah, that's really interesting. I never thought of it that way. I have one very specific question about Eulogy that we were talking about a little bit before, but that I think our viewers would be interested in hearing about, and that is about Slender Nation. Can you bring the viewers up to speed on what Slender Nation is within the book and what some of the inspirations for that were?
Yeah. Well, William's mother, Janet Oakes, becomes right around the time William sort of comes to Jesus. Janet finds Slender Nation, which is a kind of like an Amway-style multi-level marketing product. It's like the catch-all. All you have to do is use this product and sell this product and recruit more people to sell this product, and everything will be great. So it's kind of a parallel structure to the religion in the story. What does it add to the story? It adds some comedic elements. I mean, well, let's not kid ourselves here. Like, I didn't set out to write a funny book. I wrote but there's those moments, and Slender Nation provides quite a few of them, um, where, it's just being promised as the cure-all. So, is it a real product? No. Can you think of products like that? Have you? Someone shows up, old friend contacts you out of the blue and says, "Hey, have I got an opportunity for you?" You know the pitch is coming.
Yes.
Get in on the ground floor. So call it a stand-in for every kind of last-ditch pitch business opportunity you ever get exposed to in life, and they're always sort of based on bringing in all your friends and family members, and everyone buys in, and if everyone buys in and keeps buying in, then everything will be fine. It's a twisted kind of faith, and I find it was a strong kind of element for story.
Yeah, and I think it's some of the most interesting parts of the book. I'm like, what is Slender Nation? This is so strange. But I have another specific question about Eulogy, and that is, why did you choose to structure the book the way you did? For the readers who might not know, Eulogy is kind of structured with each chapter after a certain line in a eulogy that William Oakes gives at the beginning of the books for his parents who have passed. And it's really interesting to structure it. And why did you choose to do it that way?
Well, I guess that goes back to the story of writing the book. At one point I had a big long novel, much longer than this one, that was the story of William Oakes from age 11 to about age 13. And it's just the story of him finding religion and the help to fix the house to the point where he realizes this religion isn't for him. And, it was well written in the sense that, it all flowed together and stuff. But the story had two problems in it as it was written then. One was what happened? What happened after? What happened to this kid? What happened to the parents? What does he grow up to be like? And the other one was what perspective was the story being told from? So in rewriting it, I decided to bring William into adulthood, to find a job that might fit him. And I did find a job that seemed to fit, putting him in the museum lab as a conservator. It seemed to be a good place for him to be. And then it was a question of, well, what's an event that would really make him look back? And at that point, okay, his parents die. His parents die in a car accident, and let's take him back. So at that point, the event that makes him look at his past is going home to bury his parents and deliver their eulogy. At which point the eulogy sort of becomes a natural structure for breaking out the story of where he came from and what his relationship was for them. It just seemed to organize the whole thing. So then once I saw that, I said, yeah, that's how I'm going to write it. It just came out like a gift at that point. And so I went with it. And, the test of these things is always, does it serve the story? Does it make the story better? And I felt it did. It really did. It organized everything quite nicely. And it allowed me to be able to move back and forth between, say, his contemporary 30-year-old life and the memories of being 10, 11, 12 years old. And to have a structure that can clearly do that and that the reader can follow without having to stop and figure it out is really important, and that's why I went with it. So yeah.
Yeah, I found sometimes that juxtaposition between 30-year-old William and young William to be really interesting, and the choices that you made. So thanks. I think that's really really cool.
It just, well, to add to that, what it does is it mirrors the way life goes a lot of the time, right? Like, we all live our lives, try to be as present as we can in whatever moment, whatever we're doing each day. But at the same time, we carry within us simultaneously all the memories playing in our minds, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's isn't this the goal of getting through each day? is to do so, to be aware of what we're doing in any specific moment, and also to not be shutting out, who we are. And so this gave a good structure for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and I think that that for me was one of the most interesting experiences when I was reading the book. But that's
good. I'm pleased.
Great. One more question about Eulogy, and then maybe we can take some questions from our viewers. But
sure thing.
I want to ask, just before we move on to that section, what is the final message or feeling that you hope your readers will have or understand when they're done reading Eulogy? Like, what's the one feeling that you want them to leave the book with? Or is it just whatever you want?
Wow.
I know it's a big question, and you don't need to give like a solid answer about it. Like, this isn't going to go on your permanent record, but.
Well, I'll give you one, and that, I mean, the thing I'd love any reader coming away from this book would be to say, "Wow, I just read a great book."
Well, that's
but,
number one.
Yeah, I think that I don't like to think of message, because I'm not much of a preacher, certainly not in this book, but I think that what I'd like to think this book gives is insight into someone who goes through a lot of real hard times and someone who potentially could be someone who couldn't ever really grow as a person, but somehow who does. And I think that, that may reflect in some ways, the way I look at life, that I'll always have as dark as life ever is, there's always a sense of mild optimism that keeps us going. There's in the good moments of life, we don't really need anything to keep us going. Life's good. Mm-hmm. And in tougher times, a little hint of optimism is really, really useful. And he's not an optimistic character, yet he seems to find his way through some things. And I found that reassuring when I got to a moment in writing the story where, it feels like this guy can get through this. I got a little bit of just a buzz out of that. I was like, wow, that's really kind of neat that this character can get through that, and it feels right. It feels honest, and so if someone could take that away from this story, I think that's great.
Oh, that's really, really nice, and I agree. I mean, reading this book, there's a lot of really heavy parts to it, but when you get to the end, I at least that's the feeling that I kind of had too, where it was like, wow, like he's lived through some stuff, but he's gonna be okay. But anyway, let's move on to a question.
Yeah, there's a chance. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a chance for someone who's gone through so much stuff like William has. I mean, there's a chance for everybody, which I think is an interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was at least the way I was thinking about it. Anyway, let's take a question from Connor. I'm going to put this question on the screen for you. You've already touched on this, but how were you able to make the shift from writing short pieces to book-length stuff? You talked about how you started off as a couple short stories. Did you marry them?
Yeah.
Or what?
Well, I guess with those two pieces was just that realization that I thought I was writing two different characters, and they turned out to be the same one. And then it's like, okay, now the game is on. I got to figure this out. So it wasn't. I always had that idea. Like I would love to write, write and publish a novel. Mm-hmm. But in this case, the story demanded a novel. It just couldn't be contained in a small space. A short story didn't get at it, didn't get at what was going on. Mm-hmm. So the transition to writing a novel came by necessity in order to convey the story I was trying to write. I had written, I have drafts of previous novels I wrote when I was younger that didn't, I was glad to have completed them. They didn't really work. Mm-hmm. And in the end, when I look back at in particular one I did about 20 years ago, was that it was something that probably I could, if I wanted to, I could hack at and compress down to a good short story. But the material in it didn't demand a novel. Whereas I felt this one really did demand the novel. And that was how the transition happened for me. And the one thing is that became scary too, because then you're into unknown territory. It's like, wow, I don't know when this sucker's going to end. I don't know if this is going to end. And then you're like, I'd really like to feel like I've accomplished something. And so that takes some time. So to a certain extent, I think every story we ever write is an act of faith. I can do this. I can find my way through this. The story will have an end. And the novel is just that much bigger a leap than the short story that way. Yeah.
Wow.
Thanks for the question. That's a great question.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Connor. That was a good question. let's go to this question by Jesse. Let me pop it on the screen for you.
Okay.
Oh, you kind of already talked about that, didn't you?
Yeah, we have a bit, but
Do you have?
yeah, we have, but I'm happy to repeat it. Like, yeah, is to, make sure you get started and to write regularly. Make sure the majority of the days in each week have some concerted writing time,
Mhm.
and don't fear the material you start producing. Like, if it takes you into strange territory, good, that's excellent.
The
Pursue
stranger, the
it.
better.
Stranger, if it takes you to a place, say, oh no, I shouldn't write about that, then you must. Engage with your taboos. There's enough polite, happy stories out there. There's enough stories that are just happily scratching the surface of life. If you find something that really digs in, then I think you should go for it.
That's good advice if ever I heard any good advice. So thanks, Jesse. That was a good question. But I mean,
Yeah.
just to listen to you talk about writing, do you like writing or teaching writing? Like, which one do you like more? Just because you talk about writing, like you love teaching it, but you love to write.
Yeah.
Which one do you prefer?
I find they're complementary. I'm lucky in the case that the courses I teach, both here at U of T and at Haliburton School of the Arts, are kind of, I mean, they're agreed upon outlines that I've that I do there, but they're courses of, kind of my own design,
Mm-hmm.
and they are structured in a way that I find energizing. I'm always trying to encourage my students to listen to the work they are producing and to hear the potential in their work, to hear the opportunities in their stories, and to really go after those.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, I do teach the technical skills of writing and some of the basics in terms of structure and style and that kind of thing. But the thing I'm most concerned with is encouraging people to go after the guts of the stories that they're writing. And sometimes those aren't the stories they thought they wanted to write. Sometimes they're things that are emerging in those drafts. And so in terms of, which do I like better between teaching and writing? I find that I get energized in my own writing by my teaching. I mean, I always like taking a break from it. Like, right now, my courses are done and I'm not teaching again until February. And because I'm actively writing a new book, I'm looking at, well, that's a lot of good time, working time I can take advantage of. But I know by February I'll want to be back in the classroom, even just to get some structure to life. Like it's good to get out there, and I find the energy my students bring to the table really, really brings me along. It sort of brings out the best in me in terms of, like, you see how badly they want to be able to write their stories, and I want to help with that, and that kind of raises me up, in terms of what I try to do.
Oh, that's a really great answer, and I'm gratified to hear that writing teachers kind of have that symbiotic relationship. Well, at least one writing teacher does. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
You
I
mentioned.
can't speak for everybody.
Yeah, but I mean, at least I know I've had great writing teachers, so hopefully more than me. But you did mention just now that you are working on something else, and I know we discussed it a little bit earlier that you can't say too much about it, but is there anything at all you can share with our viewers, or no?
Yeah, I'm working on a new book, and it's going to be quite different from Eulogy. I think it's going to span probably several generations, and it won't be without my usual weirdness. There'll be something strange in there, but I don't. I think it'll be a little bit different from the way Eulogy got into the strange and arcane. Um, I just think, I think the story probably starts somewhere in the 1860s, and it probably ends sometime around now.
Wow,
And
it's a big story.
yeah, so I'm playing with how those time leaps happen.
Mm-hmm.
But and I haven't ruled anything out in terms of things happen, but different scenes, different years. I'm there.
Ken, are you
Hello?
there? For our viewers who are still watching, I think Ken is frozen.
Oh, I'm right here. Hello? Hello? Hey there.
Hello, you there? Hey.
Yep, yeah, I'm right here. Okay, you're back.
That's kind of weird. But I lost the tail end of that answer you were given about your upcoming generational novel. Um,
Uh,
did,
I guess basically the way it is, like I was saying, it starts in the 1860s, as I understand it now, and I think it ends in contemporary time, as I understand it now. And I have several scenes written through those times of different characters and of multiple generations, kind of all stemming from one family. And I'm just letting those scenes grow and letting the transitions build between them, and I'm pretty excited about it. It's got me energized and working every day. So we'll see where
well,
it lands.
that's really good to hear. And with that, I think that is all that we have time for. Um, we've come to an end of this BookTrib Live. Thanks everybody for joining us, and don't forget to head over to booktrib.com and leave a comment on the live chat page to be entered to win a copy of Eulogy. Ken, thank you so much for joining us. I learned a lot.
Okay.
It was really great to talk to you about Eulogy because it's a great book, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Okay,
Great.
thanks. My pleasure.
Bye.
Take care.